Good morning. I'll call to order the Arapahoe County Public Attorney to my right, Jolene Sanchez, Assistant Clerk to the Board. Ms. Sanchez, would you call the roll of the Board, please?
Commissioner Jackson?
Here.
Commissioner Holland?
Here.
Commissioner Conti?
Good morning.
Good morning. Commissioner Baker?
Here.
Commissioner Sharp?
Here. Commissioner Jackson, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Paul, do we have any modifications to the agenda this morning?
There are no modifications.
Thank you. I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
I so move.
Second. Motion made by Commissioner Holland, seconded by Commissioner Baker. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Oops. Oh, I skipped over those. Sorry. It is. Okay, we will go back here and approve the public meeting minutes for September 26th, 2017, and we had a full board. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second. Motion made by Commissioner Conti, seconded by Commissioner Baker. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Is there anyone in the audience? This is the citizen comment period. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak during citizen comment? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented. Motion made by Commissioner Holland, seconded by Commissioner Jackson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. We have one public hearing today, and that's on the proposed 2018 budget. Our presenter is Mr. Todd Weaver, Budget Manager, Finance, and our attorney is Mr. John Christopherson, Deputy County Attorney. And Mr. Christopherson, would you set the foundation, please?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this item today is to hear a presentation of the 2018 budgets, open a public hearing for public comment, and then continue the public hearing until December 12th, 2017, at which time the Board will consider adoption of the 2018 budgets. Record should reflect that notice of the proposed 2018 budgets was published in the October 19th issue of the Villager newspaper. Therefore, the Board, and acting as the ex officio board of the Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Public Improvement District, have jurisdiction to consider the 2018 budgets.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson.
Good morning, Board.
Good morning.
Today I'm here to present the 2018 recommended budget. As Mr. Christopherson said, it was presented to the Board of County Commissioners on October 10th. The presentation today is the same presentation that was given to county staff and the Board of County Commissioners on October 17th at a study session. Seeing no public here, I will give a concise version of the presentation, but all the slides from the full presentation are included in the backup for this public hearing this morning. For 2018, some of the key budget challenges are that for many of our departments and offices, we continue to see an increased need for expenses related to a growing demand and workload for some of their programs and services, as well as inflationary increases in some of those costs. The benefit of the Colorado real estate market is that we have actual values, market values of property in Arapahoe County increasing dramatically during this latest assessment period, and the taxable value is increasing significantly as well as a result of that new construction and market growth. However, property tax growth is somewhat restrained by the provisions of Tabor and the reduction in the residential assessment rate in the Gallagher Amendment. One of the key challenges is finding ways to fund that growing operating need and capital need without unbalancing that operating budget or drawing too much from our fund balance. The goals of the Executive Budget Committee, and the Executive Budget Committee is Commissioner Sharp, Commissioner Jackson, Open Spaces Director Shannon Carter, and Treasurer Sue Sandstrom, who developed the recommended budget before you today. The goals were to structurally balance the general fund operating budget, maintain that total compensation philosophy, maintain expenditures without reducing fund balance too much, working on reducing a backlog of projects in both capital and deferred maintenance that are accumulated during the recession, and be mindful of long-range budget needs that are on the horizon for the county in the next number of years. In addition, the 2018 recommended budget supports and balances priorities among the three main goals of the county's Align or APO Performance Management Program of Service First, Fiscal Responsibility, and Quality of Life. Going over some of the numbers in the 2018 budget very briefly, the total revenue across all funds is $378 million. That's a 5.4% increase over 2017. General fund revenue of $179.5 million. That's about a 5% increase over 2017. But if you remove one-time revenues, that brings it down to $178.8. On the expense side, about $390 million in expenses, which is a 6.5% increase, and general fund expenditures of about $189. The general fund is the chief operating fund of the county. If you take out one-times from the general fund, it drops to $177.1 million. Staffing is up 61.25 FTEs over 2017's budget. However, there is about 43 of those FTEs that are already approved in the 2017 budget, but due to the timing of the 2018 budget, they're recorded here as well. The estimated ending general fund balance for 2018 at the end of the year, if spent as proposed right now, would be $39.8 million, just under $40 million. That's a $9.5 million use of that fund balance. The total county net assessed value is about $10.3 billion. That's an increase of 14% over the prior year. And the mill levy estimated at this point is 12.839 mills, which will include a temporary tax credit of about 3.052 mills to prevent overcollection of revenues under Tabor, and a 0.024, a very minuscule Tabor refund of an overcollection from 2017. Capital improvement budget is currently at $13.5 million. Structurally balancing the operating budget in the general fund has a number of benefits for the county, foremost among those fiscal responsibility, not spending beyond our means, and reserving that fund balance for one-time uses such as capital projects and maintenance projects, which is one of the things that you will see that we've done with the 2018 budget. The operating surplus in the general fund budget right now is $1.7 million. That's significantly higher than surpluses we've had in the operating budget in prior years. In 2017, that surplus was about $336,000. Looking at revenue, property tax is our largest source of revenue, about 60% in the general fund, 41% across all funds. We've had a market increase of about 25%. As I said, that taxable value, the assessed value increase of about 14%. Revenue will increase about 4.8%. That resulted in about $6 million in new property tax revenue in 2018 versus 2017. We've seen a slowdown in the growth of motor vehicle revenues as car sales have kind of leveled off and plateaued. However, we are projecting about $800,000 more in specific ownership tax across all funds receiving that revenue. The county receives about $10 million in specific ownership tax in an average year, 2017. So $800,000 is still a pretty healthy increase for that revenue source. The increase in building activity and new construction and change in the building permit fee schedule will result in an over $1 million increase to those revenues. The increase in taxable value will also increase our tax collection fees in about $400,000, as well as similar increase in the interest earnings as the Fed gradually increases that interest rate. Here's the general fund revenue trend over the past number of years. You can see it's grown from the rather stagnant revenue years of 2009 through 2013 during the recession. You can see the growth has returned in 2016 through 2018. Not to dwell too much on property tax value trends, what you'll see on here is that the actual amount of new construction is $1.2 billion in 2017's reappraisal, which is a 46% increase over 2017's new construction amount of $800 million. What that does is that increases that new construction factor in our Tabor growth formula from about 1% to about 1.25%. And with 3% estimated inflation, we're expecting that Tabor growth rate to grow our property tax at 4.2% for 2018. Here's the trend in what we think the actual value in the new construction will be and has been for the county. You can very clearly see where the recession was in that 2011 through 2013 area where you see the dramatic drop-off in new construction. You can see for 2018, the actual value jumped up quite a bit on this chart, and so did the revenue. The new construction amount. But as I said, the revenue will only grow at about 4% because you're limited by that inflation plus that new construction. Here's a quick display of the mill levies we're anticipating for 2018. You can see that the general fund will generate $130 million in revenue as compared to about $124 million in revenue from 2017. In other funds, we're expecting development disability. It has a fixed levy to have an increase of well over $1.3 million to bring that revenue up to $10.2 million for development disability. ALEA also has a fixed levy. Their growth will be $6.7 million over $6.1 million in 2017. The mill levy for the Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Public Improvement District will drop from 18.2 mils to just under 15 mils due to the increase in the assessed value and the rather static nature of the debt service payments that we make for that authority. Here's a quick depiction of the mill levy history for the county. You can see in times of recession, the mill levy grows as that temporary tax credit shrinks, and in times of economic expansion, that temporary tax credit grows and the mill levy falls. Projections for assessed value show that we expect a little bit of an increase in 2020 from the 2019 reappraisal, but we think that'll be muted by a further reduction in the residential assessment rate during that time period. Revenue will remain a pretty constant growth rate between 2018 and 2022 because, of course, we are still limited by the new construction plus inflation, which we estimate to be around 3%, and the new construction to be around 1%. Currently, the general fund operating budget is structurally balanced. On this table right here, you'll see that we begin the year with about $49.4 million in our fund balance. On an operating basis, we're expecting to collect about $178.8 million in operating revenues and spend $177.1 in operating expenses, which results in that $1.7 million surplus. If you consider one-time revenues we do not reasonably expect to collect in a future year, and one-time expenses for things such as the election and capital projects and maintenance projects, if you add those in, it's $179 million in revenue offset by $189 million in expense, which means we'll be using about $9.5 million of that general fund balance, bringing it down from 49 to just under $40 million at 39.8. The trend in the operating budget shows that it was relatively flat up through 2015. 16, 17, and 18 have shown a return in the growth in the operating budget, but as you can see, it also is there's also a growth in the one-time uses of fund balance as well. Vacancy savings reductions is a critical tool that we use to balance out that operating budget. In prior years, we've taken out 2% for larger departments, 1% for smaller departments. When the recession hit, that increased to 3% for larger departments and 1.5% for smaller departments. And at the current 2017 amount, it was 3.5% for large departments and 2% for smaller departments. For 2018, vacancy savings still is a key component in being able to add in total compensation recommendations, whether it be salary increases or benefit increases. Those vacancy savings reductions for 2018 will be 3.25% for large departments and 2% for smaller departments. Flipping over to total compensation increases that are included in the 2018 recommended budget, there's a merit increase pool of 3.5%. That results in a addition to salaries of $3.9 million across all funds and $2.2 million in the general fund. A brief history of prior merit increase pool amounts. Last year it was 3%. In 2016 it was 3%. But in 2015 and 14, as we were coming out of the recession, it was lower at 2.25% and 2% respectively. The law enforcement step progressions, moving one officer from a step to the next step in the step progression, that's budgeted about $420,000 for 2018. $360,000 of that is in the general fund. Market increases based on the survey results that the HR analyzed this prior summer indicate that ranges will be moving about 1.8%. We will also be moving the ranges 1.8%, but only adjusting salaries for those positions that hit the bottom of the range and need to be moved up to maintain that minimum of the range. That'll result in a budget amount of about $227,000, $166,000 in the general fund. There's also an adjustment to the STEP program for market salaries. That includes that 1.8% structure adjustment as well as about 1.5% to keep it with the 75th percentile. That results in funding of $1.2 million across all funds. And because of the large number of uniform officers in the general fund, $1 million of that $1.2 million is in the general fund. On the benefit side, the benefit renewals that came back from our health insurance provider showed about a 5% increase for 2018, which would have resulted in an increase in cost to the county of about $700,000. Proposal from HR was to sort of split that increase with employees so that the dollar amount of the increase was split 50-50 between the employee and the employer. That reduces the increase for the county budget to about $450,000. Similar adjustments are made with the dental plan as well, although the dental plan will include a few more benefits for employees in 2018. And then finally, on total compensation, The Retirement Board came to the Board of County Commissioners and recommended a 0.25% increase in the retirement contribution for both the county and the employee. That is included in the recommended budget at this time at $322,000 across all funds. One of the key concerns for the Executive Budget Committee in recommending this budget was to try to maintain the expenses in our operating budget, but at the same time maintain a fund balance at a healthy level for the general fund, which is the main operating budget, as well as in some of the other operating funds such as Road and Bridge and ALEA. The recommendations reflect that focus on catching up on some of those deferred projects, addressing significant department and elected office operating needs. However, they balance that ongoing structural balancing versus the use of fund balance to meet those one-time needs. So just like the unspent budget in the general fund over the prior few years of actual expenses, you can see that the remainder of unspent budget, that is, we had a certain amount budgeted and then what was spent at the end of the year, and the difference between those two numbers has dropped from in the neighborhood of $8 to $10 million as recently as 2011 and 2012, and has dropped underneath $4 million for 2015 and 16. The point there being, there's less money coming back to the general fund from items that were budgeted but that were not spent. So we're getting better at spending a higher percentage of our budget. We're now spending about 98% of our budget compared to 94 or 95% of our general budget a few years ago. What is included in the 2018 budget? There's a number of staffing increases in the Sheriff's Office. They're requesting the addition of 2 maintenance technicians to keep up with the repair tickets at the detention facility. They've had an increase in maintenance needs over the last few years. That'll cost about $176,000. There are 3 detentions operations technicians. Those are the personnel that open and close doors within the facility and perform a number of other security functions. Right now there's a shortage in that staffing area, and they have to be filled with deputies who should be performing other duties within the detention facility. So there'll be 3 of those added in 2018 for $226,000. There's 2 communication technicians for the communication center in the Sheriff's Office, an additional evidence technician and records clerk that'll help with the increasing workloads of those 2 sections. A special operations sergeant whose duties right now are split. A patrol sergeant currently splits his time between patrol management and special operations management. This will free up the patrol sergeant to focus on patrol and provide more robust supervision for those special operations unit. There's a number of centennial-related positions. In addition to the positions for the crime lab, there's also a position in there for a school resource officer. In the clerk and recorder's office, there's $1.9 million for printing of ballots, temporary staffing, and postage for administering the 2018 primary and general election. Information technology is adding a systems management position. Public Works and Development is adding an additional engineer to keep up with land development cases that are growing, as well as an additional building inspector that was approved in the end of 2017 that we've included in the 2018 budget due to the timing change. But additional revenues from building permits will more than offset the cost of those two positions. And some of the shared services, the district attorney's office has salary and benefit increases and population adjustments that result in an increase to the county of $275,000, and in Tri-County Health, an increase of about $156,000, not only because of growing population, but a 1% increase in the per capita rate. There are transfers to other funds that are changing. The transfer from the general fund to the capital expenditure fund, the capital plan for 2018 requires $8.7 million to be transferred from the general fund. And the building maintenance fund had its transfer reduced a number of years ago during the recession, and the 2018 budget restores that $300,000 to that transfer to try to keep up with some of the preventative maintenance activities that need to be done. The Social Services Fund, as I alluded to earlier, had 40 positions approved in the 2017 budget, but late enough in the year that they need to be included here as well. That'll cost about $2.4 million to the county, with about 80% of that picked up with allocations from the State Department of Human Services. In the Law Enforcement Authority, the county is funding DNA equipment as well as 2 positions for our share of the Regional Crime Lab. And there is going to be an additional 4 patrol officers in the Law Enforcement Authority in 2018. They had originally indicated a request for 6 patrol officers to be funded with the general fund. The Executive Budget Committee has recommended that they be funded in the ALEA fund. And with the crime lab positions and the crime lab equipment, only 4 of those 6 could be funded out of ALEA at this time. In the Road and Bridge Fund, a dwindling fund balance due to the fact that they have a structural imbalance in their operating budget resulted in a couple recommendations that remedy that situation for 2018. First of all, $500,000 in specific ownership tax growth over 2017 will be allocated to the Road and Bridge Fund to address some road maintenance needs. In addition, the balance of funds that need to be added by the Road and Bridge Fund to replace some of their construction equipment that would ordinarily come from the Road and Bridge Fund will be absorbed by the Equipment Replacement Fund for purposes of the 2018 budget to balance them out. If without those two measures, the Road and Bridge Fund budget probably would have gone below the policy reserve amount, which is not something that's fiscally responsible for the county to do. So these two recommendations keep the Road and Bridge Fund funded as far as equipment replacement and allows them to do a little bit more pavement maintenance than they were able to do in 2017 and keeps that fund from going below the policy reserve. But both of those fixes are not long-term fixes for the Road and Bridge Fund. For the Arapahoe Douglas Works Fund, a decline in federal funding and demand for services has resulted in a reduction of 5 FTEs and about $309,000 in expenses for that program. Looking at some of the budgets for other funds, Social Services Fund has a budget for 2018 of about $60 million, Law Enforcement at $8.5 million, the Road and Bridge Fund $16.3 million, Capital Expenditure Fund $13.5 million, the Recreation District that has its own mill levy is $1.2 million, and then the Water and Wastewater Public Improvement District a budget of $9.4 million. Going over to the capital and project side of the budget, the funding for capital projects is derived from two main sources, the allocation of property tax of and specific owner's tax of about $4.8 million, or about 1/3 of its funding. 2/3 of the funding for 2018 is coming from a transfer from the general fund of $8.7 million. The revenue for property tax and specific ownership taxes remain flat for a number of years. The only way the county is able to fund the remainder of its capital program has been to transfer money in from the general fund. In years where the unspent budget in the general fund, as we discussed earlier, was higher, $8 to $10 million, that was not a significant concern. As the amount of unspent budget in the general fund declines into the $3 and $4 million range, if we are transferring out $8.5 million and only having $4 or $5 million or even less than that unspent, obviously that'll draw down the fund balance of the general fund over the long haul. So that was a concern in improving the projects that you'll see in the capital improvement program for 2018. The CIP committee did recommend projects come forward to the Executive Budget Committee. The Executive Budget Committee reviewed that recommendation and made one change to the Precinct 5 substation construction project. They had initially requested $4.5 million in 2018 to acquire land, design, and construct that substation. Excuse me. $3 million was removed from 2018 and deferred to 2019, leaving $1.5 million in the budget for 2018 for the acquisition of the land and design of the future substation. A number of the projects you'll see in the capital improvement program deal with deferred maintenance for county facilities, including parking structures, elevators, boilers, and other infrastructure. The detention facility in particular is funded for $1.5 million to address some of the maintenance needs for that facility. That is the first of 5 years of $1.5 million in funding that will total $7.5 million in infrastructure improvement projects for the detention facility. Some of the significant projects in the capital improvement program beyond the two I just mentioned, we have elevator upgrades at the courthouse buildings for $460,000, repairs to the parking deck at Arapahoe Plaza for about $800,000, and reconfiguration of some of the space here in the admin building for the county clerk's office for the public records area of about $700,000. Infrastructure projects, there's $5.7 million funded in 2018. In those are $1.5 million for continued work on the ILF Avenue corridor improvements. There's $1.5 million for improvements to the 6th Avenue crossing between between Gun Club Road and the future Prosper development. Sorry, I'm forgetting the road that it merges with, but better alignment of that out in Aurora. There's also $750,000 for alignment issues at the Inverness and County Line Road intersection. And there's also $600,000 for updates to the county transportation plan. As you can see from this chart right here, the capital improvement program for future years is going to be considerably higher than it is for 2018. Each year there's a deficit, a gap in funding of between $8 and $12 million over that $4.8 million of property tax and specific ownership tax. In the past, that would have been filled with transfers from the general fund balance. going forward, we'll have to consider what impact that will have on the general fund balance before making those transfers. There were a number of issues not addressed in the 2018 budget. Some operating budget packages, including those requests for new positions, were not funded or recommended in the budget for 2018. Based on the committee's evaluation of whether those were needed, the priority versus some of the other requests that were funded, and concerns about growing that ongoing operating expense in the general fund. No decisions or funding for any of the large capital projects discussed earlier in 2017, such as the booking and release facility or the Arapahoe County Justice Center, are included in the 2018 budget. Recommended solutions for the Road and Bridge Fund, as we spoke about earlier, and roadway maintenance are temporary, as the equipment fund cannot continuously absorb that gap between what the equipment will cost to replace and what has been funded for that replacement out of the equipment replacement fund, as well as keeping the impact of keeping specific ownership tax flat in the general fund. That's a large source of revenue for the general fund. The $500,000 in growth that was allocated to the Road and Bridge Fund this year will solve the problem for the Road and Bridge for 2018 without a significant impact to the general fund. But in years where there may not be $5 million in growth in the general fund, not having that specific ownership tax growth may be an issue. And then long-term funding of the capital improvement program, as we just discussed, remains a question. We have increasing capital needs and a decreasing unspent budget in the general fund that could kind of work in opposition to each other. The next steps on the budget for 2018, we will recalculate payroll costs, we will recalculate property tax, and we have final assessed values from the assessor's office. We'll also review all the funds for the county and make sure that if there's anything been missed or omitted, that we include that. Also, if the Board of County Commissioners wishes to make any changes to the 2018 budget, we'll make those as well. Today is the public hearing, but on November 21st, we'll have a study session to review the third quarter budget review, as well as review any changes to the 2018 budget prior to its adoption on December 12th. With that, I would conclude my presentation for this morning and field any questions that the Board of County Commissioners may have on the budget.
Commissioner Conti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Weaver, I'm just wondering if we back up here and you were talking about projections for the ALEA fund. Mm-hmm. And we have to back up quite a ways. I debated about interrupting you so I wouldn't have to go through and try to find this later. But
was the slide with the table on it?
Yes. Remind me what page is that?
That's slide 30.
30. Okay, I went back too far. My question is regarding the ALEA fund. In your forecasting, mm-hmm. if you will, was anything taken into account as far as potential annexations from the city of Aurora and how that may reduce some of the unincorporated land for Arapahoe County?
We're aware that has an impact. In 2017's budget, they actually had a decrease in property tax because of some annexations from the city of Centennial and the city of Aurora. It's something that we don't get a lot of notice about as far as annexations from cities. That's kind of a unilateral action that they can kind of move forward with. That's a potential to take away some of the tax base of the ALA, and if that happened, then we would have a change in our projection for revenues. But there's nothing significant in the next 5-year forecast for the ALA anticipating any kind of annexations.
So that was my question was, because I understand it hasn't happened yet. So, but I didn't know if there was any kind of magical, number guru formula that you could use to, reduce slightly or come up with an average of, plus or minus.
That's definitely something we can look at. The hard part is anticipating when that annexation happens. What does that do to the service level? If it's annexation of yet to be developed property, there may not be necessarily a reduction in cost. You'll have that reduction in revenue without the reduction in cost. If it's an annexation of an already developed area, there may be a corresponding reduction in the service level if a significant amount of call volume or population was annexed. So annexations can take on a different look depending on what is annexed and what isn't.
Yes, understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I did have one, and that was on the 1.7 unspent funds mm-hmm. estimated. Can you talk, because it was much smaller, as you said, last year. Can you talk a little bit about why it was larger?
Sure.
Why it will be larger for 2018?
So as the Executive Budget Committee was going through the request for budget. In 2018's budget, as opposed to 2017, there was actually a little bit less requested in ongoing operating expenses, people, places, and things that would continue on in the future, and a higher amount of requests that were one-time projects, maintenance projects, the election itself, the general election for 2018. So as the committee was going through and reviewing those requests, as you add one-time expenses and not ongoing expenses, it results in that $1.7 million operating surplus. However, with all the one-time requests being recommended for projects, the election, equipment, other things, the amount of fund balance that was going to be used was growing. So I guess an example would be if the Executive Budget Committee recommended spending another $1.7 million, the budget would still be structurally balanced. But the concern was the use of fund balance would grow from $9.5 to $11.2 million, and bringing that number down closer to $36 million at the end of the year in 2018, not $39 million. So as they were going through and recommending requests, the concern was to try to fund as much that was needed on the operating side and the one-time side without taking too much out of that fund balance. So that's why you ended up with a $1.7 million surplus. So two main factors: less operating requests than we've seen in 2017, and more one-time requests, so more project requests this year than necessarily staffing or operating expenses.
And I'm thinking that those are things, both of those things we should be watching, and making sure that, and I think we do that, but just watching, because I know we've watched that and pretty carefully, and how much we're going to end up with at the end of the year in a surplus, and continue to watch both of those, and then how much actually goes to one time. And as I've said before, I think I'm concerned about the bringing down the fund balance, and that is something that maybe here in the next couple weeks before the final approval on the budget, to have a chance to come back and look at the capital improvement program and see if we've got that right, and whether some projects need to be done in 2018 or at that level. I think I'd like to have another discussion about that probably, and I think we are for a couple of other reasons at executive budget. So that continues to be my concern on the fund balance and the use of one-time funding.
Well, on the $1.7 million operating surplus, as the committee was reviewing all the budget requests, we weren't really adding up where we were at as we went through each department or office. And after they made their recommendations based on what they felt was most important and what was needed, just because there was money left over in the operating budget didn't necessarily mean you wanted to go back and change your mind and add things that you didn't feel were important earlier in the day or the prior day.
Right.
The committee felt that they had made the recommendations on what the county needed for 2018.
Right. Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, I think those are issues that concern us all, and I'm wondering if there is a kind of a ratio, because really, while we have a, quote, surplus in operating, we also are taking several $1 million out of the reserve. And so that's not really a surplus, if you will, although it's pot A and pot B. Is there any kind of ratio or mathematical formula that expresses that, so that maybe there's a best practices or a don't go over this line, or some kind of way that we can know? I mean, I think we're all concerned that we're in kind of a danger zone, if you will, that we're dipping into our reserves, and I don't think any of us are pleased about that. But calling that $1.7 million surplus is somewhat disingenuous, if you will, in that a number of things had to be rearranged, and I don't know, a number of requests were not fulfilled, and so on and so forth. So to my mind, it's not really a surplus. A surplus is like, wow, free money. But this is certainly not. This has got lots of strings on it.
Yeah, the surplus is in reference to the fact that on an ongoing basis, $1.7 million of revenue is not offset with ongoing expense. The rub, as you point out, kind of comes into the capital project funding. The way this county has funded capital projects in the past is to use that unspent budget that falls into the fund balance being a one-time use. If you continuously fund a capital program of $10 to $15 million, I guess your point is that really one time? If you defer the project or decide you're not going to do that project, it makes it a little bit more discretionary than necessarily terminating an ongoing revenue or terminating ongoing expense. But that's a very valid point. That's something we can look at.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. We're going to open the public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the recommended 2018 budget? Okay. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioner Jackson.
Thank you. I do want to, this was a very difficult, we mentioned this before, this was a difficult year. Every year is difficult. This one had its particular challenges, and so I want to thank the folks that really worked so hard and put in so many hours, including the Budget Committee and the commissioners for coming up with this budget. So with that, I move to continue the public hearing for the 2018 recommended budgets for Arapahoe County, the Arapahoe Law Enforcement Authority, and the Arapahoe County Recreation District, and acting as the ex officio board of the Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Public Improvement District, to continue the public hearing for the 2018 recommended budgets for the Arapahoe County Water and Wastewater Public Improvement District until December 12th, 2017 at 9:30 a.m., at which time the Board of County Commissioners shall consider whether to adopt the 2018 budgets and take further action as required by law.
Motion made by Commissioner Jackson, seconded by Commissioner Holen. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Saying none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Weaver, and everybody else who did such a great job, and we'll continue on for a few more weeks. Thank you. Are there any commissioner comments? Okay. Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.